This happened when I was in college, when I was about 20 years old. One night I got home later than usual after a night class. When I pulled into my apartment complex, I realized all the spots near my building were taken. The only parking left was the overflow lot, a short walk away. It wasn't far, you could still clearly see the building from there, along with the dumpsters that sat beside the corner of it. That's where I noticed him. There was a man standing beside the dumpster. At first that might not sound strange, but these dumpsters were specifically for my building. I had lived there long enough to recognize most of the other residents, and I had never seen him before. I also hadn't seen anyone visit that evening. Of course, that didn't automatically mean anything was wrong, but something about the situation immediately made me uneasy. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't throwing something away, he wasn't smoking, he wasn't on his phone, he wasn't even digging through the trash, he was just standing there, watching. I sat in my car for a moment longer than usual, before finally getting out and starting the walk toward my building. The dumpster sat near the corner of the building, roughly halfway between the front entrance and the back entrance. Both doors were about the same distance away, and either way I'd eventually have to turn my back to him. As I walked closer, I could feel his eyes on me the entire time. Eventually, I decided to look directly at him and hold eye contact for a second. I had once heard that people with bad intentions often look for someone who seems distracted or unaware, so I wanted it to be clear that I had noticed him, but he didn't look away. He just kept staring. The closer I got to the building, the more aware I became that I would have to choose which entrance to go to, front door or back door. For some reason, that choice suddenly felt really important. I can't fully explain the feeling I had walking past him. Nothing had technically happened yet, but my instincts were telling me something wasn't right. When the moment came, I picked the back entrance almost randomly. The second I turned my back toward him, I heard it. Footsteps, fast ones, someone sprinting across the pavement behind me. I didn't look back, I just ran. The worst part was knowing that once I reached the door, I would have to stop long enough to enter the keypad code to unlock it. My hands were shaking when I got there. But somehow I managed to punch in the code, pull the door open, and shut it behind me before anything else could happen. I didn't stop running until I was all the way up the stairs and inside my apartment. Once I caught my breath, I called apartment security. In hindsight, I probably should have called the police, but I was pretty shaken up and not thinking clearly. When I looked out the window later, I couldn't see the man anywhere. Security checked the area, but they didn't find him either. My building sat near a side street and a walking trail, so he could have easily left either direction. I never saw him again. And I never got any explanation for what happened that night. But sometimes I still think about how different things might have been if I hadn't trusted that uneasy feeling and started running when I did. When I was about 9 years old, my family was driving home from a vacation. It was late, and we stopped at a rest area somewhere along a long, quiet stretch of highway in Virginia. You know the kind of place: dim lighting, a mostly empty parking lot, trees surrounding everything. My mom and sister stayed in the car, while my dad took my little brother and me into the men's restroom. Inside, it was empty. Just the buzz of fluorescent lights and the sound of running water while we washed our hands. We were almost done and about to leave when someone suddenly started pounding on the bathroom door from the outside, hard enough that all three of us turned around. Then it happened again, fast, frantic banging like whoever was outside needed in immediately. My brother and I looked over at my dad. He was staring at the door, listening, and then we heard a voice. An older man's voice, but he wasn't speaking normally. It was loud, strained, almost like he was forcing the words out. At moments it sounded less like talking, and more like some kind of harsh bird call echoing through the door. My dad eventually said, almost casually, "Dan, go ahead and open it for him." So I walked over and cracked the door open just enough to look outside. The second the latch moved, the door shoved inward. An older man forced his way past us in a rush, brushing us aside like he barely noticed we were there. He moved straight toward the sinks, already digging into the pockets of his coat. As he pulled his hands out, something came with them. I remember the sound more than anything. A strange mix of little clicking noises, like pebbles or small stones knocking together, along with the dry crinkling sound of paper. Whatever it was, he dropped some of it onto the counter near the sink while muttering to himself under his breath, not loud enough to understand. just constant, rushed whispering. My brother and I looked at my dad. My dad looked back at us. None of us said anything. We just quietly headed for the door and walked back out to the parking lot. To this day, I still don't know what the man was doing or what he had pulled out of his pockets. Maybe it was nothing special. But every once in a while, I bring it up with my brother and dad about how strange it all was. Even though this happened almost 10 years ago, it's one of those memories I've never been able to shake. Back when I was about 11 or 12, my mom and I lived in a small apartment complex. Nothing fancy, just a narrow hallway with a handful of units facing each other. And directly across from ours lived a man who always made us uneasy. Now I could probably tell an entire series of stories about that neighbor. Strange comments, odd behavior in the hallway. The kind of person who just made the air feel tense whenever he was around. But one moment stuck with me more than anything else. Before that moment, there had already been a few strange things happening. Every once in a while, we'd find little notes slid under our door. They weren't threatening exactly, just strange. Short messages written in messy handwriting. Sometimes it would just say things like "too loud." Other times it would say something even stranger like "I hear everything." My mom always tried to brush it off, but I could tell they bothered her. One afternoon, my mom ran into him in the hallway. I remember hearing their voices outside our door. Later she told me she had been trying to keep things civil, maybe clear up whatever issue he seemed to have with us. For a few minutes, it sounded like a normal conversation. Then suddenly the door opened. My mom came inside quickly, shut it behind her and locked it. I remember looking at her and immediately realizing something had gone wrong. She looked shaken. When I asked what happened, she hesitated for a moment before repeating what he had said to her. Apparently in the middle of their conversation, completely out of nowhere, he told her, "If I were you, I'd keep your daughter away from people like me." And that was it. No explanation. No context, just that sentence. At the time, I didn't fully understand why it scared my mom so much, but after that day, things around the apartment started to feel different. Whenever I was home alone during the day, which was pretty often since I did school online while my mom worked, I started noticing every little sound in the hallway. Footsteps, doors opening. Sometimes the faint sound of someone moving around right outside our door, and every time I heard it, I couldn't help but think about what he had said. A few more notes showed up under the door after that. Eventually, we moved away from that apartment. Nothing ever actually happened. Now, I never thought I would say this kind of thing, and I feel a little guilty about it, but thankfully, he ended up dying before he ever did follow through on his creepy-ass comment. There used to be an old Kmart on the edge of town that sat abandoned for years. Everyone knew the place. The big red letters were still bolted to the building, but the K had burned out long ago. The parking lot was cracked and overtaken with weeds. And the old cart corral was still sitting out there, with two shopping carts chained together, like someone had left them mid-return and never came back. For the longest time, I never really thought about the place. It was just another dead store along the highway. But one night, a friend and I decided to check it out. The side doors had been forced open at some point, probably by other people curious enough to wander inside. The metal frame was bent just enough that we could slip through without much trouble. The first thing that hit me when we stepped inside was the smell. Not rot exactly, just that heavy, stale air that buildings get when they've been closed for too long. Dust, old carpet, maybe a little bit of mildew. Our flashlights swept across the front of the store, and for a second, it felt like we'd stepped into a place frozen in time. Most of the shelves were gone, but the layout of the store was still there. You could see the outlines in the floor where aisles had been bolted down. Faded signs still hung from the ceiling: electronics, seasonal, pharmacy, tilted at strange angles. Somewhere deeper in the building, there was a slow dripping sound. Just water echoing through the empty space. We walked past the old checkout lanes first. The conveyor belts were still there, cracked and dusty. One of the registers had been smashed open, the plastic drawer hanging crookedly out of the counter. But what felt strange was how quiet everything was. Even whispering sounded loud. When we stepped farther into the store, our lights started catching things left behind. A plastic bin full of clothes hangers, a stack of empty display boxes, an overturned shopping cart lying on its side, and then we started noticing smaller things, little bits of trash, wrappers, crumpled receipts. Stuff that didn't look old enough to have been sitting there since the store closed, which meant people had definitely been coming in here. We moved toward the toy section next. The ceiling there sagged slightly, and the floor was littered with broken plastic shelving. One of the shelves still had a few things on it, not toys. Just random junk someone had left behind. An empty soda bottle, a burned candle, a few small stones lined up in a row like someone had arranged them carefully. My friend joked that maybe someone had been living in there, and honestly, it kind of looked that way. We kept walking, sweeping our lights down the long empty aisles. That's when we saw the footprints. Dust covered most of the floor, but across one section there was a clear path where it had been disturbed. Fresh footprints. Not a lot of them, just enough to show that someone had walked through there recently. The thing that made it weird was the direction. They went deeper into the store. But we couldn't find any that came back. We followed them for a little while, mostly out of curiosity. They led us past the garden section, where a few rusted metal racks were still standing, and toward the back of the building near the employee stockroom doors. The air back there felt colder for some reason. Our lights passed over an old bulletin board still hanging on the wall. Faded papers were pinned to it, employee schedules from years ago, curling at the edges. And then we heard something, just a small sound, somewhere farther inside the building, not loud. But definitely something shifting. My friend and I both stopped walking at the same time. We listened, nothing for a few seconds, then another faint sound. Like something being dragged lightly across the floor. We didn't say anything, but we both turned our flashlights toward the dark hallway that led to the stockroom. The beam barely reached halfway down before it disappeared into darkness. For a long moment we just stood there, waiting to see if something would move. Nothing did. Eventually my friend laughed nervously and said it was probably just the building settling. Maybe he was right, but neither of us really felt like going farther after that. On the way back out, I glanced one last time toward the toy section, and I swear the little line of stones we'd seen earlier looked different, like someone had moved one. Maybe we had bumped the shelf earlier and didn't realize it. Maybe the floor wasn't level, or maybe it had always been that way and I just remembered it wrong. Either way, we didn't stick around to figure it out. We slipped back through the bent side door and out into the quiet parking lot. The cold air outside felt weirdly comforting after being inside that place. We stood there for a second looking back at the building. From outside, it looked completely dead. Dark windows, empty lot. Nothing moving, but the whole drive home I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. The ones that went deeper into the store and never seemed to come back out. I still drive by that old store. It hasn't been renovated yet, and I have no plans of going back anytime soon. I live in Pennsylvania, and right now everything is completely buried in snow. Earlier today, I spent nearly 3 hours digging my car out. Tomorrow I have an interview, so I needed to make sure I could actually get out of the driveway. By the time I finished, my car was finally free, the engine was warming up, and I was already dressed to go out anyway. I figured I might as well just drive to CVS tonight instead of dealing with it tomorrow. The closest one is about 15 miles away. Normally, it's around a 20-minute drive. When I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed something strange right away. An older woman was standing directly by the entrance. Not walking in, not walking out, just standing there. And she was looking straight at me. I tried not to think much of it and went inside. The trip itself was quick, just grabbed what I needed and headed back out. But when I stepped outside, she was gone. I didn't see her anywhere in the parking lot, so I walked to my car, got in and shut the door. And within seconds, someone knocked on my window. It was her. She had somehow appeared right beside my car. I rolled the window all the way down, which my mom later told me was a terrible idea, and asked if she needed something. She asked me where the closest store was. I told her there was one right behind her. She shook her head. No, the other one. So I suggested the flea market across the street. Again she said no, the other one. After a second it clicked. She meant Price Chopper. The problem was that store was about a 10-minute drive away. Then she asked if I could give her a ride. She told me she had been trying to call her daughter, but her daughter wasn't answering. Something about the whole conversation started feeling off, so I asked how she got there. She said she walked. I asked from where, and she told me she lived in the same community as me, about 15 miles away, in the middle of a snowstorm. That didn't make any sense. I suggested she call an Uber. She said she didn't like Ubers because they took too long. Then she insisted again that the store was just down the street. At this point, my brain was running through every possible scenario. Part of me thought maybe this was just an older woman who genuinely needed help, but another part of me kept saying that something about this situation felt wrong. Anything could happen once someone is in your car, so I told her I couldn't. I said I was in a hurry. She tried a few more times, little stories about her daughter, how it would only take a minute, but eventually she stopped asking and slowly walked away, and that should have been the end of it. But here's the part that stuck with me. While she was talking to me, there were other people walking in and out of the store, cars pulling in, people getting into their vehicles. But she didn't approach any of them. She had waited until I came out, until I got into my car. When I finally started driving away, I checked my mirrors. She was still standing there in the parking lot, completely still, just watching my car, and as I drove farther away, I could see her head slowly turning to follow me the entire time. Until I turned out of the lot and she disappeared from view. I don't know why she picked me, and maybe it really was nothing. But the part that still bothers me is, if she had supposedly walked 15 miles through the snow to get there, why was she just standing in the cold for God knows how long? Not even waiting in the warm store directly behind her,